I'm Lauren Kling, and this is 5 Things That Changed Your Life. Each episode, I sit down with a special guest and ask them to share 5 stories, events, or experiences that had an impact on their life, like a person who helped them decide a path to take, or a place that completely transformed the way they think. Perhaps it was inspiration from a family road trip or a childhood TV show that helped them to make the person they are today. This week's guest, Vin di Bona. Vin is the creator and executive producer of America's Funniest Home Videos, which airs in more than 190 countries, and here in the United States is ABC's longest-running primetime entertainment show. Here's Vin talking about how a Japanese variety show led to America's Funniest Home Videos, now in its 28th season.
That led, 3 years later, to Tokyo Broadcasting me saying, "We have something we want to show you in a variety show." And so they showed me the show, and there was a dance number, there was a singing number, there was a talk show segment, there was a comedy skit. And then they showed 3 home videos. And at the end of the show, all the celebrities on the show had to pick which one of the 3 was their favorite. They said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, variety is dead here. Jettison everything. All home videos, make it a contest, and that's our show." And I sold that. I sold the clips from the Japanese show. I made a 12-minute presentation. And in 4 minutes, the guy at ABC I pitched it to, Hank Cohen, said, "We're going to buy this show." I'll never forget that. We're going to buy this show.
Joining me in my conversation is my co-host, Alan Ng. Why don't we get started with one thing that I'm curious about is that at one point you were a teenage crooner.
Yes, I was. I was 15 years old. I had been singing for about 3 or 4 years, and I literally sang at my dad's restaurant in the cocktail lounge when I was 14, having parked cars earlier that day. And they never let me cook because I wasn't a good cook. I was a good cashier. I was a good counterboy. I was a good waiter. I was a pretty good singer. I started singing at around 13 or 14. I had been in dramatics and dramatic and elocution lessons from when I was about 9 and done some radio. And all about the same time I was doing summer stock in Rhode Island, and I did Annie Get Your Gun and High Button Shoes, Zero Mostel and High Button Shoes, Ginger Rogers and Annie Get Your Gun. And then I did some non-musicals. I did a play called The Remarkable Mr. Pennypacker with Burgess Meredith.
Wow.
And he was a kind of a wimp of a guy, at least everybody thought so, except he had a wife and a family in New York and a wife and a family in Philadelphia. And he would go back and forth and back and forth. And I played one of his kids, one of the New York kids. In Annie Get Your Gun, I've got a great story, and then we'll get into the record.
Yeah.
I was a singer, dancer, stage prop guy. You know, you did everything. Part of the chorus. Interestingly enough, Ginger Rogers was accompanied by this, handsome young beau. And aside probably from servicing her, he would stand at the gate with a clicker and click everybody who came in because she got a percentage of the tickets. So she wanted to make sure it was right. So there was the overture of Annie Get Your Gun, and as a stage manager, singer, dancer, blah, 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 my job was to come out in pitch black and darkness in this big round tent, 1,200 people. And I had to attach these stanchions around the stage that then became, with lights on them, that then became sort of the rodeo look for Annie Get Your Gun. And then after I attached them, I had to plug them in. And everything was going smoothly. The overture was playing. It was pitch black. I attached the stanchions, and I couldn't find the friggin' plug. And I'm searching around and searching, and finally I see this massive plug into the side of the stage, And I said, screw it, I'm going to pull it, and I'm going to plug my lights in. And I did. And I pulled out all the orchestra pit lights. So that was the beginning of that show. But I was singing, and, you know, for 3 or 4 years, I was going... I would get out of school early on Friday. I got special dispensation to get out at 12. And I would, my mom or dad would take me to Providence Railroad Station, and I'd catch a train to Merchants Limited to New York. I'd get in at 5, sometimes accompanied by my mom, sometimes alone. And I'd take vocal lessons in Carnegie Hall with Carlo Menotti, one of the greats in singing instruction.
Wow.
And then after that lesson, I would go from Carnegie Hall to 8th Avenue, and I'd take a styling lesson, phrasing, with a guy named Benny Menendez, and I'd work till about 8:30. Zip across town and catch the 9:15 milk train back to Providence, get in about 1 in the morning, and my mom or dad would pick me up. I did this for about a year.
Wow.
And then I made a few little recordings in Rhode Island with the trio that I sang with in my dad's lounge. They weren't so great. But my dad had a friend named Jimmy Crane, and Jimmy was a songwriter, and Jimmy wrote Timmy Euro's Hurt. And Al Hibbler also sang Hurt. It's a big record. And Jimmy had 2 songs, and we liked them very much. And Benny and I went over the phrasing, and we found this fellow who was an arranger in New York who had hits. This was in 1960. He had hits in 1954, 55. And we paid him to arrange, and we did the session in Nashville at Owen Bradley Studios, where Connie Francis, Patsy Cline, Brenda Lee, Roy Orbison, they all recorded in that studio. It was an amazing studio. It was in Owen Bradley's house. It was a duplex. And down in the basement is where he had the recording studio. And it was, I think it was 1 track. I don't remember dual tracks. But they had, along with Les Paul, they had invented reverb. And so the studio had, if you listen to any one of those records of the celebrities that I mentioned, the singers, you can hear that sound. It's like Columbia Records had their studio in New York, and if you listen to Patti Page, Johnny Mathis, any of the big stars in that year, you can hear their echo chamber. And it was simply a room with a big long spring, and they had a microphone in there, but they had that sound. Well, anyway, the Owen Bradley Studios had its sound, but on top of that, we hired Floyd Kramer on the piano, Grady Martin on guitar, and I had the Anita Kerr Singers and the Jordanaires, who used to back Presley. So it was a pretty damn good record.
And you were, how old did you say?
I was 15.
How is it for a 15-year-old boy? I mean, it
scared the shit out of me. I was very nervous, but I had a really good voice. And the record broke in New England, and it did very well. Oddly enough, the record company didn't have enough records pressed, so that when the record went to the charts, you couldn't buy it in the record stores, and it just fell apart. But I went all around New England and Pennsylvania, New York, Baltimore, promoting the record. And then a second record I made when I was in college was here in Los Angeles with a fellow named Hank Sanicola, who owned the record company. It was called Tab Records. I think that's the Tab record there. I'm looking at something that's sitting on the ground. he was Frank Sinatra's manager for all the years until Frank broke up with him, left Capitol Records, and started Reprise.
Right.
And so my hopes were with these next 2 records that I cut, and I think it was a tax shelter record company, because they got pressed, never got released. The second record he assigned to 20th Century Fox. It never got released. Oddly enough, 60 years later, 60 years later, the fellow that wrote I Can't Face My Friends, his name was Johnny Rotella, a big studio musician and writer here in L.A. His daughter's husband was an A&R guy for features. And there was a feature with, I'll think of her name in a second. She did Sophie's Choice.
Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep and Tommy Lee Jones. This was out about, maybe 5 years ago. And they wanted to use this record that never got released as a background track. And I just was, holy moly, I'm going to be in a movie. And so I went to the movie. And it was in the middle of this one scene in a restaurant that I said, there's the song. I couldn't even hear it. It was so low. So, long story short, the record business helped me get into visiting TV stations and performing on TV. And it got me interested in television and radio. And then I decided to go to Emerson College, and I studied radio and television and film. And then when I came out to UCLA Film School, I got my master's in film and documentary.
Right.
So that's sort of that's it.
Now,
you know?
you said you were nervous at 15 being in this famous studio with these famous
Hell
musicians.
Yeah. Sure.
Did you have doubts about your abilities?
Mm-mm.
You were...
I had a very good voice. I had a range that was spectacular. My breath control was terrific. The song was a good one. And I had all these great players behind me. I wasn't worried about that. And
Right.
I think we did maybe 3 takes of each song. It wasn't much more than that.
Do you think you were respected from them? Did they see
Oh,
this
yeah,
15-year-old?
absolutely. Oh, no.
They knew.
They were good musicians, and they appreciated my voice. They really did.
Do you think the nervousness was maybe maturity or the lack of, or...
I'm a 15-year-old kid in the Owen Bradley Studios in Nashville.
Yeah.
I'm looking around like gaga, you know. And but as soon as I started singing, I was fine.
It's interesting that you said that got you into the door of TV stations and got your mind wrapped around television.
Mm-hmm.
Was television your first love, and then film and documentary came
Well, it was
second?
interesting because I was really involved in radio at Emerson, and eventually I ran the rock radio station. But my first year was totally radio. You started television in your second year, and in the first class that we did in television, you had to do a 30-second, it might have been a 60-second PSA as a producer-director. So you had to write the copy. You had to have someone do the voice. There was a booth announcer. You had music, and you had a sound effect that you added into the visuals and supercards. There were no chyrons or anything. These were all supercards. So you had to come up out of black, hit music, dip the music, voiceover announce, hit the sound effect, flip the card, super the super, fade to black. That was it. I was so discombobulated. The first thing I said, oh, shit, television. Oh, man, I can't do this. And then we had our second assignment, and so I decided I was going to practice directing in front of a mirror. So I would up out of black and cue music, cue announce, blah, 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 yada, yada, buddha, bada. Boom. It was perfect. So, then I got bitten. I really wanted to do TV. And we had special assignments, but we also had every Thursday, we had a broadcast afternoon where we were on as a TV station that went only to a TV in the smoker. You know, one TV, if there were 6 people there, we were thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
But they divided us into groups of twos, and Jeff Goldstein and I were dear friends, so we decided we were going to do the Help dance party show. And I was directing, he was producing, and we had 2 cameras, and we shot the hell out of it. And so aside from our normal assignment, there was a game show, there was a talk show, there was our Help show, and it was strictly around the Beatles' Help. It's where I got my sea legs.
Did it even feel like school, or
No.
did you know this was the
No.
thing you wanted to do the rest of your life?
No. In fact, we were hosting a television radio society called AE Rho, Alpha Epsilon Rho. We were a chapter member, and then we decided that we were going to go after the convention. And the conventions, it was USC, it was Penn State, it was all these big schools, Syracuse, and here's Emerson. We had 450 students in the student body.
Wow.
And so what we did was we rebuilt the control room. It's amazing what you can do with paneled wood and molding. Molding especially.
Right.
Molding hides all the ills of your terrible carpentry work. So we built this control room, and we did the Help show and a show that a young Greek friend of mine, there was the show called To Tell the Truth. Mm-hmm. Well, he flipped it, and he called it Fibberino. So it wasn't 3 people that you had to figure out. It was one person telling 3 stories, and you had to figure out which story was correct. It was actually a pretty good format. And so it was that. And so these kids from all over the country came to see us. And when we finished the Help show, everybody stood up and applauded us. And I knew that I could do this for life, But I decided, I knew radio, I knew, television a little bit. I wasn't experienced. I was still a student. So I decided rather than go to graduate school for television, I wanted to go for film. And it turns out I did one little film, a 3-minute film, and then my second film was a 12-minute film about an old shoemaker in downtown L.A., and I spent a week in the shoe shop watching him cobble shoes, and
Wow.
That was my film. But my thesis film, because now I was taking documentary courses, and it turns out that Basil Wright, one of the premier filmmakers from the British Film Unit, the GPO, mm-hmm. who had done Song of Ceylon and Cold Face and Night Train. These were major documentaries. In Britain, the documentary film department was run by the post office. And so that's where they got their money. And he was a guest lecturer for a year at school. And I took his courses, and he befriended me. And so for my thesis film, I did a film on hobos in Southern California, guys who rode the rails. And I spent about 3 months going to Santa Barbara, which was a big hobo area. And I spent a whole weekend in a rescue mission, living and eating with the guys. And then because everybody collected in that area, I interviewed many, many guys. I did a campfire with the guys. Then we hopped a freight train, and I was shooting with my camera rolling. I had what did I have?
Do you have like an old Mitchell?
No, I had not an Arri. It was, oh my goodness, I can't remember. Anyway, it was one of the top cameras of the day.
Right.
I'll think about it in a second.
Okay.
And it was an interesting course. They took filmmakers and anthropologists, put us together to make something about society. And the guy who I got was an ethnic musicologist. So he wanted to do the project because it allowed him, as we were on the road, to record as many original hobo songs as possible in a clear 16 millimeter.
I was going to
clear.
ask,
Yeah.
what made you come up with these ideas? A cobbler, the hobos, as opposed to when I was in film school.
Yeah.
We had the some people did the stories where it was just this slow moving shot with dialogue.
Well, you see, at the same time as I was going to school, we were taking all these courses. We were watching Man of Iran. We were watching Man of Aaron. We were watching the Eskimo film.
I saw that in my doc class.
Gosh, it's so great. So all of these, and I guess I had a social conscience then. So a friend of mine from Emerson who was living in Santa Barbara, he said, there's a lot of hobos around here, because I was looking for a film project. I said, geez, that must be great. He told me a story that in the, I'm going to get the dates wrong, but the area is right. It was either in the late 30s or in the late 40s. This very, a lot of wealthy people in Santa Barbara. This wealthy woman had no children, died, and there were so many itinerants in the area. She left her mansion to the itinerants, and it made the city nuts, because all these guys were hanging out. They were lighting fires in the living room, So what happened was the city burned the place down, supposedly. And so I heard that story, and so I went down there and did some good interviews, pre-interviews. And then I took it back to UCLA, and you had to plead your case to get your funding,
right?
And they loved it, so that's what I did.
Where do you think you got your social engagement?
I know exactly where. See, my dad ran a restaurant. And
Lindy's, correct?
Lindy's, right. That was the diner. The
picture on your wall
looking
was the
at
diner.
A picture on the wall was the diner. In the 50s, he bought his partner out and turned it into a restaurant, and a banquet hall and a cocktail lounge. But anyway, I was going to junior high school, and my high school was about a mile from the restaurant. So I'd come home after school, and everybody at that age, they're hungry. So I would have a burger or a piece of pie, and I'd sit on the counter. We had an 11-seat low counter, not with stools but with chairs. And in that era, traveling salesmen would take a break in the middle of the afternoon. They're on the road all day. They're knocking on doors. They're bored shitless, so they come in and they sit down on the counter. And I would be sitting in the counter, and I'd strike up a conversation. And I learned how to interview from those conversations. I'm going to give you a story. This is going all over the place.
That's great.
So now I graduate UCLA. I get a job at WBZ in Boston, and I'm now, after about a year, producing my own documentaries for the station, as well as directing news and talk shows. So I was doing everything. But we're doing this documentary this was in 1972 or 3. We had an oil crisis here in the country, and people could barely heat their homes in the winter because it was so expensive, and mortgage rates went way through the roof, and nobody could afford. If you lived in a town all your life like it used to be, then you start your family. People could not afford to live in the towns where they grew up. They'd have to go way the hell west or east or somewhere out of the city, but they couldn't live in the towns they were born in.
Sounds
it was just
like
too
LA
expensive.
today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to interview John Kenneth Galbraith, who at the time was the economist of our land. And it was one of my first interviews by myself. Prior to that, I'd gone out with one of the executive producers, and I was the cameraman. But they decided I should start doing my own stuff. So I asked him if he could give me his theory on what was going wrong with the country and why we couldn't get our stuff together. And he answered, and it was this very astute, complicated answer. And I bit my tongue and twisted my fingers and crossed my toes and said to him, Mr. Galbraith, I don't understand what you just said. And I don't think our audience is going to comprehend the boldness and the complicated journey you just took us through. He said, oh, okay, well, I can make it simpler. And he did. And it was the first time as an interviewer that I knew I could impact what was being said or control what was being said. I also learned that I very infrequently, going into an interview, interviewing someone else, I'll know about them. I'll try and do as much research as I can, but I won't write any questions down. Because I feel that if you have a list of questions, very often as a producer of that show, you don't listen to the answer because you're waiting to ask your next question. It happened to me on Entertainment Tonight. One of my reporters, I was producing, one of my reporters went out to interview Bette Midler. And Bette Midler had just had a movie flop. And she said, I'm so despondent. I don't know if I want to continue my career. This business is too hard. I don't know if I can deal with this anymore. And instead of asking the right question, she said, and what other movies are you working on? And I fired her on the spot. I absolutely fired her on the spot. Because you do have to be a communicator to communicate. And you know, these are lessons, life lessons that you learn.
Especially when your subject is being that real.
Oh, my God, she's pouring her heart out. And it was either what's your next movie or who are you dating, even worse. You know, I mean, it was just friggin' ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are things you pick up along the way, and it's most of it's common sense.
It is, but sometimes it's surprising the arm flailing that goes about until you calm down and you're like, oh, there it is. All right, I'm back where I was. But, you know, this podcast, certainly learning things, doing live interviews.
Of course.
But I do discover, just like you, that my parents, it would take us 20 minutes to leave a restaurant because my parents would stop and talk to everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
Every child, and
sure.
I loathed it. And then something happened to me as an adult.
Absolutely.
Something about it, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife went through the phase of, oh boy, now Lauren's, you know, it's like now it's a trio, you know, my wife is watching.
Right.
But I've learned that I love being off book.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing events
mm-hmm.
where if something happens unexpected, that gives me permission to breathe and relax.
Sure.
And everyone understands somehow we're going to make it through.
And by the way, as a documentary filmmaker, if you're a good one, you have a plan, you know what you want to cover, you know where you want to go, but it's documentary and it doesn't always go that way. So you have to react immediately. You know, if you've got a great plan and it fell apart, well, throw it out and pick it up with whatever's happening that moment, that day.
Do you remember any projects you worked on where something like that happened?
Well, yeah. Even in I was doing after I was doing these sort of impact projects at Westinghouse. I was assigned to produce a show called 1672. In 1972, 16% of Boston was black. So we addressed that, and we did a black magazine show. It was the first fully sponsored, Lever Brothers sponsored magazine show in the country. And so we did everything. We covered everybody. We covered everybody from the Mau Mau to Malcolm X's sister to Herbie Hancock to Cannonball Adderley. And then we were covering the 1972 Black Convention in Gary, Indiana. And I walked in with the crew. I was the only white guy in the crew. And my dearest friends to this day still were from that crew. And I walked in as the producer, realizing I was in an auditorium with 60,000 black faces, and I was the only white face. And I immediately started carrying camera equipment and turned it over to my other producers. And but at the same time, we all came together to ask the right questions. We did a hop from Gary, Indiana to Atlanta, Georgia, and we interviewed for a Mother's Day show Martin Luther King's mother. And it was a seminal moment in our lives to hear her talk about Martin. And now, Martin's father, Daddy King, was a minister, and a good one, but nothing like his mother. She was vibrant. She was a fire starter. She talked, speaking of fire, she talked about a time when Martin was growing up and the KKK went by their house and threw a Molotov cocktail into their window. And you know, to be able to tell these stories was a thrill, a real thrill. I don't know if that answered that particular question, how I might have changed.
But I guess the sense that I get from what you're saying is, I mean, I always enjoy interviews where people are just being real.
Yeah.
They're not, they don't have a set agenda to get across. And I feel like that happens more today. Maybe people fear being too honest today. So they go down to their talking points, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. I could understand that.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, I think that's ultimately your goal is to, for Lauren, is to, you know, break down that and just say, let's just have a chat. Let's talk. Let's see how you really feel. And
sure,
you know, that always makes the better interview.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've found that some of my favorite interviews have been with everyone from unknown people. I've had Twitter conversations where I've just introduced myself and said, I'm Lauren. Here's something interesting fact. Share one with me. And I'll go to bed and I'll look at the 2 or 3 people who actually respond. And I'm like, this is fascinating. I am fascinated. And strangely, part of it goes back to my childhood. I felt like I was ignored. Nobody paid attention to me. Now I have these strangers who are talking to me. And I'm just being honest, and I find that amazing.
So when I was born in 1944, I weighed 2 pounds. The fact that I survived was 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1. Even today, somebody at 2 pounds is risky business. And it was at a point where premature children were left in the incubator too long, and their eyesight went, and that's what happened to me. I lost the focusing ability in my left eye. The retina just got blitzed. Fortunately, our doctor said to my mother, I just read an article in the New England Journal of New England Medical Journal that said over-oxygenation can potentially cause blindness. And he pulled me out. And some of the doctors said to my mother, you know, he was in there so long, you know, he was born so early, things might not have formed right, you know, don't hope for too much from this child. You know, in fact, if he's a custodian, consider that maybe as far as he can go. And so my mother devoted her life to me, you know. She wasn't going to let that happen. And we were very blessed. So it was my father in the restaurant business, when he saw me, he literally, you know, 2.5 pound baby, you can put it in the palm of your hand. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me and he said, I cook chickens bigger than him. And So it was a shaky start, and I had a rough childhood in terms of I caught everything because I was susceptible to everything, weak lungs, but it made me stronger. I was just at the Stars last week for Chris Pratt. Yeah. Pratt, yeah.
Oh, his star unveiling.
And his wife's name's Anna Faris, and they have a premature baby. He was born way young. His name is Jack. He was sitting there, 5 pair of glasses, of course, and I made my point to go up to her and said he had just received the star. I wanted to get that over with because. You don't want to interrupt somebody. I do that because I'm the chairman of that committee of picking.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Picking people, yeah. So I just went over to her and said, Anna, Anna, and she said, yes. I said, I just wanted to tell you that I was 2 pounds when I was born. Tears coming down from her eyes. And I said, Jack's a fighter, and Jack's going to be a leader. And she gave me the strongest hug I think I've gotten in the last 10 years. Because it's true. You know, premature kids have to fight harder. And it was a long, hard battle. My illnesses as a kid were not great. I probably stayed out of school 30% of the time from being ill.
Did you, now I didn't sound like you had any stories of, did you have friends that would come over, or did they understand what was happening with you?
Well, I was a sickly child, but I wasn't I'd run out and play.
You weren't house-ridden?
No, I wasn't house-ridden. No, not at all. It was just, I was so susceptible to getting ill. And I hated wearing eyeglasses. My mother said I flushed at least 3 or 4 pairs of eyeglasses down the toilet. She said we had the plumber over the house every other week. You know.
That was before contacts.
Oh, wait. That was before anything.
Wow.
I've always heard, I guess I've always felt that adversity always made us better.
I think so.
I mean, to the point where, you know, maybe I don't want to shield my child from everything.
Yeah. That's a difficult lesson these days because parents tend to want to shield from everything, you know.
How did your...
I think that's why there's so many allergies.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's...
Right. How did your childhood affect the way you were and are as a parent?
I'm not as overprotective as my mother was. I mean, when I got sick, she got scared. When my daughter got sick, I was very, very concerned, but not scared.
Right.
And yet, and I was an only child, and I had an only child. So there's something to be said about that. And my daughter, who now has 3 children, she's always said, you know, I think I missed having a brother or sister. So she had a young boy. She had a boy who's now 16.
Wow.
And she had twin girls. So when I think Sam was maybe 4 or 5 when the twins were born, and about a month and a half after the twins were born, Cara said to me, you know, Dad, now I understand the concept of an only child.
Do you feel as a grandfather you have the pull to want to be a parent, or did you kind of say, you know what, that's up to my child now to determine how to parent?
Well, I think I'm going to quote a line from a documentary that I did on the family with a famous Jewish psychologist in Manhattan. And he had a group of parents who would come and pay real money to listen to him talk, not in a therapy session, but sort of a group session. And he said, you know, grandparents and grandchildren get along very swimmingly because they both have a common enemy.
I have a grandmother who just passed, and you know, My dad did not have a great relationship with his mom, but I had a great relationship
with her.
With her.
Right.
It was limited. I was a lot younger, but yeah.
You guys probably schemed together and
Probably. I was too young, so I played the first through the fifth. At one point, there was a newspaper article that I read where you were rejected 136 times around 1986 for Animal Crackups. Mm-hmm. And being in the position of living in Los Angeles and pursuing being a host, and basically in that world of entertainment where creativity and artistry meets business, which is rejection and finances. So were you determined from the start, from rejection 1 to 100 to the 136th?
I think you have to be practical about what you believe in. I think if you have a bad product and it's just so, and you go through 3 or 4 interviews or 5 interviews and people say, well, there's not much there, then I think you have to say, okay, I got to do something else. But this product was from a Japanese game show about animals. It was like Wild Kingdom meets Hollywood Squares. And they had a panel of celebrities, Japanese celebrities. And basically the show was built around what animals would do to get food. And the Japanese had a propensity to screw around with the animals and see what they would do to get the food. So like there'd be a macaque monkey, and one day he'd give him a banana. The next day they bring out a 3-foot banana and see what goes on in his head because he's freaking out now.
Right.
Or a lion, for instance. A lion has no sense of smell. None whatsoever. So they would dangle a piece of steak, the size of a dinner plate, over his head, and there'd be nothing going on until they bopped him in the head with it. He looked up and he grabbed it. Tigers, unlike lions who live in prides and are used to having the family unit there, tigers pretty much live in solitude. So they're not used to seeing other tigers. So these guys set up this giant mirror in this huge cage. I mean, it was really not a cage. It was more like a small parking lot. And, they would show lions coming in. And lions go up to the mirror, just sort of poke around, stick their nose in the mirror. And nothing much. And then a tiger would come in. And a tiger would walk up to the mirror and do a double take when he saw himself or herself. And it was the funniest damn thing you've ever seen. You see a tiger do a double take. And so this is the kind of thing they did. I'm setting up the whole premise of the show. And so I would go to interviews and people, well, it's Japanese. I said, I understand, but did you laugh? Yes, but it's Japanese, and it's a Japanese panel. I said, well, just imagine if that woman in the panel was Betty White or Charlie Callis or whomever from TV. That would be your panel. Well, it's Japanese, Same story all the time. I actually pitched it to a dear friend, Lucy Sulhaney, who was running Paramount at the time. And I pitched it through 3 times. She said, Vin, I know there's something here. I'm just not sure I can take a chance on bringing one culture to another. Finally, I sold it to my first boss, who I'd worked with in Boston 25 years earlier.
Wow.
He was running children's television in daytime, and late night, rather. And American Bandstand was going off the air. And he needed something to appeal to 18 to 34-year-old women. And when he saw I had a tape from the Japanese, I put a little reel together. He saw it, he said, that's it, we're going to do 2 pilots.
But with American celebrities, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, all here. And then that led, 3 years later, to Tokyo Broadcasting me saying, we have something we want to show you in a variety show. And so they showed me the show, and there was a dance number, there was a singing number, there was a talk show segment, there was a comedy skit. And then they showed 3 home videos. And at the end of the show, all the celebrities on the show had to pick which one of the three was their favorite. They said, what do you think? I said, well, variety is dead here. Jettison everything. All home videos, make it a contest, and that's our show. And I sold that. I sold the clips from the Japanese show. I made a 12-minute presentation. And in 4 minutes, the guy at ABC I pitched it to, Hank Cohen, said, we're going to buy this show. I'll never forget that. We're going to buy this show.
What was the difference between 4 minutes versus 136 rejections?
The clips from Tokyo Broadcasting were so freaking funny that you couldn't stop laughing. And he knew it was going to be a success. And that was it. So, no is not an answer you should take unless you're not smart enough to know that what you're showing is not decent enough or captivating enough to be a great show.
So over the 136, were you trying to tweak, trying to find out what do they want, or were you sticking to your guns and saying, I know this works?
Didn't change a thing.
Didn't change a thing.
Not a thing.
Because I think that would scare a lot of people.
Yeah.
What does somebody else want that how they're going to want?
No, because what was happening, Lauren, is that in as many times as I'd run it, I know where the laughs were. And the laughs hit in the same place each time. So why should I change it? You know,
It's observant.
We do that on our show. I mean, when we put a show to get together here, we all sit and, you know, it's probably gone through 4 or 5 cuts before it hits me, and all the producers sit on this L-shaped couch, and the writers, and we all screen the reel together. That's going to go in the show. And we may change it or pull stuff in or fix stuff, or sometimes I'll say to the writers, if you write a funny line, I'll keep that clip. And then we have to remember what our reaction was as a group the first time we see the cut. Now, they've seen it 3 or 4 or 5 times, but not everybody. And so, you know, we screen it a second time. Well, you didn't laugh quite as hard. You got to remember how you laughed the first time.
I was going to say, because in a group setting, it's going to be different than somebody at home who's...
Not necessarily, because we're a family show. So there's going to be at least 2 to 5 people watching the show. So the group setting is really what we're after. So when we were selling the show internationally, everybody wanted to buy it immediately, except for Holland. And so we said to the Dutch, well, why aren't you interested in the show? Well, because it breaks one of the first rules of courtesy in Holland. We don't feel that it's appropriate to laugh at someone's misfortune. It's a standard kind of socio feeling that we have for our country and our countrymen. So I said, okay, let's get an audience together and we'll show some clips. And the first clip came up with somebody getting hit in the groin with a golf ball, and they fell on the floor. And we sold it.
Do you think that speaks ill of humanity, that we revel in a way, even though we know that these people weren't permanently hurt?
I feel like we've been there. It's like...
Yeah, we know.
There's a shared experience.
Yeah, there's... Oh, my God, thank God it's not me, you know? Better him than me.
Yeah. It's funny how every so often my wife and I will catch the show, and...
Wait a minute, what do you mean every so often?
No, see, because at my home every week.
There you go.
Every so often when we've paid the electric bill,
yeah,
and
there
our
you
TV
go.
works,
Okay.
and our internet.
I didn't let you finish.
But but when I think about the times through my lifetime, as in college and a young adult, 20s and 30s, and in my 40s, it's always funny. The show has always been funny, and a lot of shows I loved as a kid, TV serials,
don't hold up.
Don't hold up.
Yeah.
So why is this such a timeless show, no matter how old you are?
Well, we have to serve kind of two masters on the show. Because generations have grown up on this. Generations have grown up on this and have now introduced it to their children. So there's sort of a familiarity with what the show is and what to expect in the show. At the same time, we got to be different. We got to change. We got to find new ways to crack an egg, Mm-hmm. And so finding that right kind of sensibility is something we work on all the time. Last 2 years, there's been a great addition to the show. Some great things. Face swap. The new smartphones with their slow-mo cameras. Mm-hmm. And that slow-mo is better than any slow-mo we've ever had. And, so when you see a dog go reach for a Frisbee and it misses his mouth and he falls, over backwards, it's something we've never really examined before. Right. And so there's all of these new additives keep the show fresh. Yet, the formula in the first act is we show something very funny as the first clip. We show something very redneck as the second clip. We show a baby or a dog as the third clip. Then we show something totally unexpected. And we end it with somebody getting hit in the groin. That's kind of the way it goes in the first segment of the show, There's variants of it, but not really.
Yeah. When your editors are working, is there the title card, groin shot goes here?
Yeah.
Until you find it?
It's actually what happens is the editors, the writers are the people who put the reel together. They have thousands of cards on their wall. And what's good about the group is that most everybody's worked together here for 10 or 15 years. So there's a good memory factor where you don't have to search the data, but you only search the database for the number of the clip, but you remember the clip. And in many instances, not only do you remember the clip, you remember what year the clip was in.
So are they writing to new clips that come in or
yes,
old clips?
All the time. We have 3,500 to 5,000 submissions a week.
Wow, still.
In the old days, a good week by snail mail was 800 clips.
On VHS or 8,
right.
Yeah.
Now it all comes in digital.
Now it's all digital, right?
So much easier.
Yeah. Everybody uploads.
Wow. Did you have something?
Well, is there something something that impactful today that is specific to the last few years that has changed the way you do things versus that would never have existed maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Well, in terms of the show, it's there are new technical advances. Then I think as a producer, the issue today is that the audience is constantly changing. The way they watch programs is changing. I just read something this morning that many of the big cable networks are down 2% and 3% and 5% since this is their first quarter. And people are streaming. So I think we have to look at ways to keep current. We do a lot of social media. We have a department of 9 people in social media here, and for a show that's going into its 28th season, we're usually between number 2 and 4 as the most social media savvy show on the air. We have over 1 billion impressions a month, and we feed the social media not just regurgitated stuff from the show, but we create segments that are coming up or things that people like to see, and it keeps us fresh. It keeps us, in front of people almost on a daily basis, and that's important. That's very important.
Have you always been open to change, or have there been times where you really weren't ready, either financially or physically or technically?
8 years ago, maybe 9, I was watching a CBS News broadcast in the afternoon, 5 o'clock news, and the announcer said, "Hey, there's something new out. It's called YouTube. Let me tell you what you can do. You can send things to this, and it can go all over the world, and you can see stuff. And we want to show you some of the things you can see on YouTube." And they played 6 clips. 4 of them were mine. So I went batshit crazy and said, we got to stop this. So for about 3 years, we did everything we could to get takedown notices and fines and fees and blah, 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 yada, yada. And like everybody else in town, it made no sense whatsoever. So we decided, let's join them. Let's appeal to the YouTubers, and let's appeal to the platforms that are sharing videos and create new platforms. And that's what we did. And it was the best thing we ever did.
And people aren't just viewing, they're reacting and having a conversation back.
Sure.
Which I think is important, too. And it sounds like from when you were singing as a kid to documentaries, you've always just been able to adjust as you've needed to.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, and I don't think although we concentrate on making a great show, we don't take ourselves that serious because we are involved in fun.
Right.
And I don't believe in the laugh machine. I use it to soften up some of the applause, but the laughs you hear in the show are the studio laughs, and that's important.
Yeah. Is there any project you've always thought of that you've never been able to get off the ground?
Well, I did a project about 12 years ago for ABC called Big Moment. It's another Japanese format. And you give a family a task. And you have an expert go to the house and show them what the task is. It could be anywhere from someone in the family who can't play piano has to learn how to play Fairlies in 1 week, or teach a 6-month-old dog 5 tricks, or spin 12 plates on a stick all at once, or memorize pi to the decimal point, to the 100th decimal point, which is, I think, 112 numbers consecutively.
Wow.
And then someone in the family has to do that, and they get a cash prize. Well, it failed on ABC about 10 or 15 years ago, only because it was on Saturday night, the death slot. And so I'm trying to bring it back again now. It looks like we're going to do it. But we've got tons of shows in development. We're doing a show on crop dusters. We're doing a show on hip-hop. We're doing something called Crispy Revival, which is a sort of southern comedy show in a revival tent. We're doing a show on 2 guys in Florida who build Pontiac Grand Ams,
Wow.
GTOs rather. Our pool show was canceled a year ago, and it's such a great show. And the network was having a problem because it was on Animal Planet, and it was a show about pools.
About backyard pools, not playing
fabulous
billiards.
Yeah, fabulous
I
backyard
remember that,
pools.
yeah.
And they called us a week ago, said, hey, we think we'd like to do the show again. The reruns are going through the roof. I've never had a show canceled and then call me back a year later and say, we'd like to do it.
Was there a short time when shows became for everybody to these niche shows? I mean, it's amazing how niche some of these shows are.
And I think what we're going to see is that the shows are so niche and the networks are so niche, the networks are going to start going off the air.
The big networks?
No, the
You're talking
smaller
about
cable.
Okay.
Smaller cable networks.
And where will all of these shows go?
Online.
Yeah, online. That's you're absolutely right.
I mean, kind of like
for
Radio
a fifth the budget.
Yeah.
Radio Shack goes out of business, but they're online. That kind of thing, where they become an online presence.
Perhaps.
I mean, you look at like Netflix. They're giving money to Adam Sandler to make movies, and they're not necessarily concerned about viewership. You know,
they're not concerned about viewership because Netflix and Amazon especially, they don't care about making money, and they don't care about ratings. They care about getting consumers to their consumer lines and to buy stuff on Amazon Prime, and getting them in for the shows just increases that ability.
Yeah.
It's not
the content. They want the content.
Yeah, it's interesting. So thank you guys. This
Ben,
has been great.
Thank you very much. Thank you as always to my co-host Alan Ng and to this week's guest Vin di Bona. Follow America's Funniest Home Videos at afv.com. You can follow us online at fivethingspodcast.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/fivethingspodcast, that's FIVE, or on Twitter at fivethingspod, that's FIVEPOD. Subscribe to 5 Things That Change Your Life on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review while you're there. We'd really appreciate it. You can also listen and download our show on Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Alexa, or your favorite podcast service. Music by My Monthly Date. You can find them at facebook.com/mymonthly date. For 5 Things That Changed Your Life, I'm Lauren Kling.